let's start with Wang Yi's visit to Russia. What
Mm.
do you think of Wang Yi's visit's main purpose to Russia?
This is a very interesting meeting, actually. Now, the meeting was scheduled in advance. There is a China-Russia um, coordination council, and Wang Yi was invited to it. And he was invited not just as foreign minister, but in his role as national security advisor.
Hmm.
And the invitation apparently came from Sergei Shoigu, who
Hmm.
is the secretary of Russia's Security Council. Nonetheless, Wang Yi also met Lavrov, who is apparently, I mean, they're friends.
Hmm.
And I think there's a chance, a good chance, strong chance, that he's going to meet Putin probably today, because
Hmm.
tomorrow Putin is flying to India. So Putin has a very, very tight schedule. And by the way, I should also say that he's not well. He's got a cold. So he
Okay.
might need time to get over that too. But anyway, I think there's a good chance that he will nonetheless make time, at least for a brief meeting with Wang Yi.
Hmm.
So the meeting is taking place uh, in general so that China and Russia can coordinate positions. I mean, this is the
Hmm.
wider thing. But of course, the interesting thing about this is that the Russians nonetheless decided that this meeting was so important that they wanted Wang Yi in Moscow, even though Putin Putin's time was taken up with having the Americans there.
Hmm.
So the Russians wanted this meeting for a number of reasons. Firstly, because they wanted to brief Wang Yi immediately about what Putin discussed with the Americans. Um, Also, they will have wanted Wang Yi to give his own input
Hmm.
because the Russians are very conscious that the Americans are busy at the moment trying to play Russia and China off against each
Hmm.
other
Hmm.
again. So Trump has talked about getting China to put pressure on Russia. Um, I don't think the Russians seriously believe that that is going to happen, but they want China to be fully informed of what it thinks about the ongoing discussions between Russia and the Americans. And they want China to be fully informed
Hmm.
about what Russia is doing and what it thinks with the Americans. And this is seen by the Russians as so important that they wanted Wang Yi in Moscow at
Hmm.
this particular time to make sure that that happened, so that there was no possibility of doubt, no opportunity for the Americans to make trouble. And of course, on the Chinese side, I'm
Hmm.
sure that Wang Yi also wanted to be there to make sure that China's voice is heard and that both the Americans and the Russians know that there is this big other player also present all the time in the background, which is, of course, China.
Yeah, I feel like Russia and China, they just simply need to compare notes from time to
Yeah.
time, right?
I think they compare notes all the time, by the way.
Okay.
I mean, I think that the level of coordination between China and Russia now is enormous. But I think particularly at this point, when Witkoff and Kushner are in Moscow, it was particularly important that a really senior person from China was in Moscow.
Yeah, and Macron is now in Beijing, so yes,
Mm,
they do need to compare. Okay.
yeah,
One thing I do find interesting from the press conference that they had, Shoigu and Wang Yi had. So Wang
mm,
Yi said this. He said that we must safeguard the victory of the World War II, which was won by lives and blood. And Shoigu said, "I have enough experience to cut off the head of the militarism hydra. We will never allow re-emergence of these criminal regimes in Europe and Tokyo." So it just seems like the two of them agrees that they
yeah,
bring up this to a level because
yes,
Russian is fighting in Ukraine, among other things, the neo-Nazi
yes,
forces in Ukraine, and China, of course, is recently alarmed by the rise. of the Japanese militarism. So
Yeah.
so it seems like that they do want to bring this to a higher level, like we need to
Yes.
safeguard World War II victory, right?
Yes. Well, this is where it's so helpful to speak to you because, of course, I speak about the Russian perspective,
Mm-hmm.
but you're bringing to me the Chinese perspective. So the Russians are concerned about America and Ukraine and also about the situation in Europe. But China also has its concerns, which are
Mm-hmm.
separate but complementary, and they're about Japan and Taiwan. Now, Shinzo Abe, who was Japan's prime minister, very hawkish against China.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, and apparently the patron, Takaichi, he played a game of trying to create distance between Russia and China.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
he came to Moscow many times telling the Russians, we've got excellent relations. We want to have excellent relations with you. There's a few little problems that we need to sort out, a few islands, the Kurils,
Mm-hmm.
but let's develop a good, productive economic relationship between our country and your country.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it was quite obvious what he was trying to do. He was trying to set Russia off against China. And I should say, again, that this is something which perhaps people in China ought to know. The Russians have always taken a great interest in Japan
Mm-hmm.
and in Japanese culture. I mean, sushi
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
became very, very widespread in Russia. I mean, in fact, it still is. I mean, they love sushi and all of this. And some Russians have a rather romantic idea of Japan. And Abe was trying to build on that. And he gave Japanese dogs as pets to Putin and things of this sort. So, again, given the tensions that are now exist and the developments in Japan also, I mean, the Chinese want to make sure that the Russians understand what this is all about. And I think the Russians clearly want to reassure China
Mm-hmm.
that, if Takaichi were to come along to Moscow and start talking the same nice words that Abe was talking, it's not going to influence the Russians in
Mm-hmm.
any conceivable way. So I think there is perhaps some subtext here. And of course, the Russians and the Chinese, I mean, when China talks about safeguarding the legacy of the Second World War, well, you're never going to find any country where they're more receptive to that message than Russia. By the way, the Russians have recently started to make the point that China lost more people in the Second World War than the Soviet Union did, which is true.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, given that how important the level of losses in Russia was, for the Russians to start talking openly about that and say China lost even more is in Russia itself, it's going to be quite a big thing. It was certainly not something that the Russians talked about much before, and certainly it would not have been acceptable to talk about it during the time of Brezhnev and people like that.
In the US, actually, they like to talk about rules-based international order. So, what are
Yeah.
the rules? They never clear what are the rules, right? I actually think one of the things that one can refer to in terms of the rules are those treaties or declarations or memorandum or what have you that multiple countries signed during World War II and shortly after. Those should be the rules we should base on, isn't it?
Well, I would go further than that. Everything that you've just described, treaties and interstate agreements, are not just rules; they're laws.
Mm-hmm.
They are part of the web of international law. Now, the rules-based, the rules-based order that we've been hearing so much about is actually an attack on international law. Now, the way I've described it, and I've given lectures about this, by the way, is that laws are something that bind everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Rules are things that someone imposes. So the parallel is this: if you look at if you talk about education, if you talk about a school, then education law binds the teachers, the children, the parents, the school principal, the minister who proposes the law, the education authorities, everybody.
Mm.
Rules are what the teacher imposes on the class. And that is what the United
Uh-huh.
States sees itself as. The
Mm-hmm.
teacher, obviously, isn't subject to the rules.
Mm-hmm.
That's the fundamental difference.
Yeah, I just feel like the US is now totally go against it. The
Yes.
lots of the things that they put together, right, including the
Yeah.
United Nations, including all the declarations and the treaties that they signed, it seems like the US itself is the one who is
Yes.
go against it
Exactly.
in many
A,
cases.
a rules-based international order represents the annulment of international
Yeah.
law
Yeah.
as it is understood.
Yeah.
It replaces a system of international law with the rule of one autocratic ruler. And when we say autocratic, I mean, it's not like the Huangdi,
No, no.
because Huangdi was not an autocrat.
No.
It's more a tyrant, actually, because a Huangdi was always constrained in what he could do. But in a rules-based international order, there is no limits on what the person who is imposing the rules. There is no real limits upon them. Now, law places limits. I mean, that's what it does. It's a very well-known legal principle. Laws impose limits on their makers and enforcers. If you have a system where there are no limits, then that is not law, that is anti-law.
Also, just so I just noted Shoigu used the word the head of a militarism hydro, which is basically support of this council, the Chinese council
Yes,
general, what he said about the cutting the head, so remember we talked about this, that I think what he meant is the militarism, pick up the forces and, something like that.
absolutely. I mean,
Yeah,
it's incredibly strong language. By the way, Shoigu, I understand,
yeah.
speaks Japanese, just to say.
Okay. So Macron now is in Beijing.
Yeah.
What is his purpose for his visit?
Well, Macron is one of the most complicated political leaders in the world today, because you remember was it about 2 years ago, he was in
Uh-huh,
Beijing,
uh-huh.
he met with Xi Jinping. The meeting appeared to go incredibly well. He was on the plane back to France. He was giving interviews. He was saying this meeting was wonderful. China is marvelous. Xi Jinping is marvelous. They got all of these wonderful plans. France should join in them. Europe should join in them. This is win-win for us. And then, of course, the Americans weren't happy, and they brought him back to heel. So, which Macron is it who's going to Beijing? Is it the one who wants to develop better relations with China, or is it America's ally? It's very difficult to say. Now, Macron is, as I said, a very complicated man. You may know, I'm sure you do know, that there's been attacks on tankers, including one that was apparently owned by a company from a company based in Hong Kong, oil tankers that
Mhm.
had been trafficking oil, which had been carrying oil from Russia to India, China, wherever. And what perhaps people in China don't know
Mhm.
is that the opinion in Russia is that these attacks, some of which have taken place off the west coast of Africa, um, happened, have had to happen with the support of a Western country.
Mhm.
And the universal view in Russia is that that country is France,
Mhm.
and that the person who's behind it is Emmanuel Macron.
Mhm.
So there is a lot of anger about Macron at the moment. and a feeling that he's becoming extremely anti-Russian, and because he has been on several times, and there's anxiety in Moscow that he's going to Paris, to Beijing, to try and make another attempt at trying to get China to change its policy with respect to Russia and Ukraine and all of that. So, I mean, there is that subtext as well. I don't believe that is actually Macron's purpose. I think Macron still hankers for some kind of economic relationship with China. And I think that at some part of his mind, he realizes that Europe is in serious economic difficulty and France is in serious economic difficulty. And it needs to have a good relationship with China if it's going to find a way out.
Yeah, the Chinese media noticed that this time he didn't invite van der Leyen to come with him,
No.
so that's a good sign.
Yeah.
And then he mentioned that it seems like next year the G7 is going to be hosted in France, and so he mentioned he would like China to join or something. I haven't seen officially he said that, but there's some report about that, and that combined with the U.S. offer to invite Russia back to be the G8 or something. They still think this G7 is a big deal, isn't it? I don't think China and Russia even care about that.
Well, the Russians have said very, very clearly that they don't care about it and they don't want to be a member of the G8. And if there's an agreement made and the Ukraine conflict is settled and all the sanctions are lifted, then even if in that kind of situation the Americans invite them to rejoin the G7, that they don't want to go. I mean, they've said this many, many times. And the Russians have a reason for not wanting to go, which is that, of course, if they were to join the G7, there might be questions whether they really are committed to the BRICS anymore. And they are very committed to the BRICS. So they don't want to be drawn back into that sort of system. But again, you could see perhaps Macron, Trump talks about Russia joining the G7. So Macron comes along and says, well, that's what Trump is saying. I'm going to ask China to join. That's the really important country. And let's bring China in. The Americans won't like that at all, by the way. No chance of the Americans agreeing to China joining the G7. And you're absolutely right. The G7 itself is, it's just America and a few of his friends. I mean, that's all it is now.
And they seem to like to use that as some kind of a tool. They invite you this time, but maybe next time they're not happy with you, then they don't invite you. I mean, why would any country want to be put in that position, right? So,
well, why indeed? I mean, as I said, it's the United States, and I hesitate to use the word vassals, but perhaps that's the correct word. It's satellites, because the only country that is of economic significance there today is the United States. The European countries individually are not the huge economic powers that they were when the G7 was first established in the 1970s. Japan is still a significant economic power, but we discussed in our previous program that Japan relative to China is where Taiwan was in 2000. So it is also a declining economic power. So nobody is going to be interested in joining an American club, basically, where all that would happen is that they would be on the receiving end of America's orders. One of the things that Putin has said is that, he said it very recently, but he's discussed it many times. He said, when we were part of the G8, what actually used to happen was that all of the others used to meet. They used to make the decisions. Then we would be invited into the room. And we would be told what the decisions were, and we were then asked to sign. So they were never actually involved in the real discussions, because ultimately it was the Americans who decided everything, and the Russians have no interest in participating in a format like that again. And it's inconceivable that China would.
Yeah, so it's like a if I like you, I would invite you to be a guest almost,
Yes,
right? It's you're not an
exactly.
equal
You're not
member.
in it.
Yeah.
Well, in America's eyes,
Mm,
and this is not just, by the way, Trump and the American political class. This is the view I still think amongst actually most Americans. The very idea of any other country being America's equal is something that they simply cannot really accept or
mm,
acknowledge.
mm,
And certainly at a political level, it is impossible.
mm. It's almost like they put this as some kind of privilege. Okay, I invite you to
Yeah,
come, be an
yes,
observer. What's the big deal?
exactly. Exactly.
Okay. Um, Keir Starmer, he made a speech, I think, talking to a group of British businessmen
Yeah.
on Monday. It's a little bit confusing to me what he's trying to say. Can you explain to me
No,
what
nor
was the
can I.
speech?
I can't understand. I mean, I should say he is in under extreme political pressure. I mean, there's debate about whether he's going to remain prime minister for very long. Some were expecting that he'd fall by Christmas. That doesn't seem likely now. But there are others who think he will fall in May, whatever, after because we have local elections in May. So uh, what he's trying to do is he's trying to give the impression that he's nonetheless in control and that he's somebody who has a deep knowledge and understanding of the world. So he talks about the fact that there's these three great economic powers: the United States, China, and the European Union, and that Britain has to find ways of dealing with all three, and that we've got to, on the one hand, safeguard our own interests, and at the same time, we must be loyal to our allies. It's banal. It is nothing. There is really no substance there. Um, Starmer has never shown any real ability to engage, say, with China
Hmm.
on any substantive
Hmm.
issue. I mean,
Yeah.
he's never really shown the kind of interest in developing an economic relationship with China that, say, David Cameron and George Osborne did a couple of years ago when Cameron was prime minister and Osborne was his finance minister.
He's planning to visit China in January. It
Yes,
sounds like, and the speech he gave, he's on the one hand he's saying, it's important to have a business relationship with China. He almost like encouraged business people to work with China to do business. At the same time, he also emphasized China is some kind of a security threat to Britain.
yes, yes.
Um, how can you do both? I mean,
Well, you can't. I mean, again, he's trying to have it both ways,
yeah.
and at one level, I mean, Britain is in a very, very bad way. I mean, I'm sorry to sort of talk about this a lot, but I
Hmm.
mean, I'm talking about my own country now. I mean, the economy is at best stagnant. I think anybody who really lives here can see that it's declining. I mean, I went to Scotland um, 10 days ago. I went there with my wife and family, and we took the train from London. The train journey is ridiculously long by Chinese standards. I mean, if you look
Hmm.
at the distance between London and Edinburgh, it is
Hmm.
ridiculously. It's not that long, but it takes it takes 6 hours for the train to travel, except it doesn't because the railway line was damaged. So
Okay.
we had to get out of the train all the way. We had to travel to we were going to a town called Edinburgh. We had to go to another town called Manchester, take another train from Manchester to yet another town, which was York, and then find our way to Scotland, to Edinburgh. So a journey that was already going to take about 6 hours took 10. I mean, that's just, not even a long railway journey by
Hmm.
Chinese standards. A Chinese high speed train would cover the distance in, I guess, about 2.5 to 3 hours.
Hmm.
So that gives you some idea. So we desperately need investment. We are critically underinvested. We don't have a strong manufacturing industry anymore. We have some people who are good in high technology, and we've got little niche things that are good. We're very good at audio systems, for example, and that's an important niche market which could be developed. So people are saying, well, look, we've got to find a way out. We've got to get investment coming into Britain. Our budget is in crisis. All of those things. There's only one country that is in a position to do that, to help us, and that is China. That was what our previous finance minister, George Osborne, was saying. But whenever that's brought up, you have all of the usual people, the people who are not really interested in developing economics, don't really want to do trade. They want to have global Britain, Britain the great power, Britain the friend of America, Britain the leader of the West. China is bad. China doesn't share our values. China is doing all these bad things in all of these places. So you can never really follow that first policy through with any conviction and through to its conclusions, because the other group will always stand in the way. And we know we've had this whole nonsense with the Chinese embassy in London. Will we build it? Won't we build it? Even the British intelligence agencies now are saying, we've not got any real problem with this, but you still get articles, this is, if China is allowed to build this embassy, it will prove that, we're subject to this evil power, even as we approve this colossal American embassy, which, has a moat around it and electrified fences and armed guards. China's embassy will have none of those things. But nonetheless, this is the real thing. So we can never really follow through. And Starmer, who is in a weak political position, never really goes against the conventional wisdom. Anyway, he, at some level, understands that his government is falling because he cannot fix the economy. He knows that there are people, business people, who say, we've got to develop this relationship with China. It is essential. We have no future without it. But he's never going to really argue with those people who want us to take a strong stand against China for all of those reasons. So he will go to China. He will say a few of the right things. He will say some wrong things. He will try to, cut the difference, and ultimately he will achieve nothing.
Why is it so hard just to tell you people, okay, we need to develop some business relationship with China because that's good for Britain? And you guys, you can say all you want, but I'm not going to follow. I mean, why is it such a hard thing? You're the leader, right? You're the prime minister.
Well, I completely agree. We need in Britain a prime minister who does that, a leader who does that. And unfortunately, the political system in Britain makes it all but impossible, because anybody who says that always runs into enormous resistance and fails. A really strong prime minister would do it. But this political system in Britain works against having a strong prime minister. A strong prime minister would go much further. A strong prime minister would come in and say, the situation in Britain is very bad. Our economy is in a very bad state. We are massively underinvested. We are short of technological and industrial skills. We cannot afford not to trade with the world. And we certainly cannot afford not to trade and not to have good and strong relations with the country's greatest manufacturing and technological power. Now, that message, no British politician has the courage to make.
Well, then it is what it is then. Okay.
Well, it is what it is, and that, in Britain, you will see that many people are deeply pessimistic and very unhappy because they know it, they sense it, that this is a political class that refuses to face the realities.
Yeah. Now, when you're talking about the embassy, so the Guardian reported that actually back in 2018, Boris Johnson, who was the foreign secretary, he actually gave approval to, he
Yeah.
gave a letter to Wang Yi, approved the
Yes.
building the embassy to purchase this royal mint and build the embassy on it. So they already said you can build it, and then they later say you can't build it. I mean, the whole thing is handled very unprofessionally, don't you think?
To put it mildly, absolutely. I mean, it's a disgrace, actually. I mean, either say yes or say no. If you say yes, stick by your word. I mean, it's obvious. But no, we have to dither. The Americans aren't happy because, they say, why do you need this big embassy with China? Well, obviously, there's obvious reasons why you would want China to have a proper embassy. By the way, I've been to the Chinese embassy. It is ludicrously small.
Mhm.
I mean, the idea that this can be the embassy of China is absurd. I mean, it really is. The same is true about the Russian embassy. The Russians, by the way, went through the whole circus themselves. Back in the 70s, they too wanted to build a bigger embassy. And I'm one of the very few people in Britain who still remembers the story, but they also wanted to build an embassy. And all the same people who now speaking out against a Chinese embassy at that time spoke out against the Russian embassy, and they said that this would be the Kremlin of Kensington and all of that. So um, we never really see these things through. Now, at the end of the day, we didn't have many economic links with the Russians in the 1970s. Economic links with China today are essential. You would have thought that it would be a straightforward thing to say, look, it's obvious the Chinese need an embassy, a proper embassy building. We have to have relations with them, good relations with them. Let's give them their embassy. We said we would, and let's see it through.
I just feel like if you have concerns, so why don't you do it up front, right? When China was purchasing the Royal Mint, China spent
Yeah,
255 million
yeah,
pound to buy this place. It's a big
yes.
decision. Why don't you communicate better with China to say, well, we might not approve this. Give us some time to check with everybody in terms internally,
Sophia,
right? And domestically, I mean, if you need approval from US, why don't you check before you say, okay, go ahead and do it? I just feel like it's so badly handled, the whole thing.
Sophia, you're talking like a Chinese person again. You simply, I don't think you can imagine how complicated and bad the decision-making process
Okay.
is here. I mean, I think I told you that in even as China builds railway bridges
Mhm.
and it creates this enormous infrastructure, building an extension to a railway line near Manchester, the British government was told would take 23 years. 23 years, because the decision making process to finally sign it off was so complicated and
Mhm.
so long. And the point is, when a decision is made in Britain, especially a decision like this, to give a country like China an embassy, it's never seen as the final point of the process. It's the starting point of the process. That's when the discussion starts.
Okay.
And that discussion will never in the end be resolved. Of course, if it's the Americans, then it's different because we don't make any decisions
Mhm.
with where the Americans are concerned. The Americans, the State Department simply phones us and tells us we need a big embassy. We're buying this building.
Mhm.
Give us the approval. And then, of course, we give it because we do whatever the Americans tell us to do.
Yeah, and the British, they just had a budget which include a tax hike and also boosted their military spending, right?
Mm.
How was that received in Britain?
Badly. It's the biggest tax increase for many, many years. And it's brought taxes up to the highest level that they have been in since the end of the Second World War. So, I mean, it's a major, major tax increase. And bear in mind, I mean, this is a depressed economy. Living standards have been falling, and this is going to cause living standards to fall further. And the purpose of this budget tax increase is basically to cover existing budget costs. It's not a budget to invest in the economy overall. I mean, it's not as if we're going to go into debt to invest in our economy. We're going to just go into further debt to cover the holes in our existing spending plans. Nobody believes that this extra defense spending is ever going to translate into anything, because everybody knows that the budgetary pressures are only going to intensify as the economy continues to decline, and there simply isn't going to be enough money to see these plans through, which are insignificant anyway. I mean, China now has 3 aircraft carriers. One of them is a super carrier. It's built it in record time. Britain has 2 aircraft carriers. They break down all the time, even though they're relatively new, and they don't have aircraft. We have to borrow the aircraft from the Americans, because if we didn't, we wouldn't have any aircraft to fly them. So, I mean, this, and our entire army is about 72,000 men. I mean,
so you have carrier, but no aircraft.
But no aircraft, no. 40 tanks, apparently, 40 operational tanks. 40 tanks.
Okay. All right. Germany. Merz also planned to visit China, not exact date, but said the first few weeks of 2026. It seems like all these Macron, Merz, Starmer, they all want to rush to go to China before Trump's visit to China in April, it seems like.
Yes.
What's your take on that, Merz plan?
Well, in Germany, I mean, we talked about Britain. Germany should need to go to China even more, because so much of Germany's economic well-being over the last 20 years has depended on trade with China. And we both remember how Angela Merkel used to go to China, and she used to bring enormous delegations of business people with her. And Olaf Scholz, we discussed it in one of our programs, went to China, and he brought a delegation of business people with him too. It's unbelievable that this has taken so long for Merz to do. And Merz, again, one gets the sense that he's not hugely enthusiastic about this. German industry is in massive decline, but the pressure in Germany, I think, to start some kind of dialogue with China is enormous. And in Germany, the business community is much more outspoken about this than they are in Britain. And there isn't the same issue about having good relations with China that there is in Britain. But nonetheless, he's wasted, almost a year of his first year as Chancellor before doing it.
Yeah, I even saw some article. They basically, I mean, the American articles commenting on Germans' addiction to Chinese market or something like that, that it's how important the Chinese market is.
Yes. I mean, addiction is completely the wrong word. The point was that China and Germany are complementary economies.
Yeah.
I mean, it made absolute sense for China and Germany to establish close relations with each other. Now, really what I'm afraid of, Merz is going to go to China, and he's going to tell China, stop exporting cars. the great Germany's industrial industry has basically contracted to the car industry and some other things. I mean, it's unbelievable to see how it's happened. And the narrative that's now being spread across Europe is that the reason the German industrial economy is in crisis is because China is producing cars. I read an absolutely incredible article, by the way. I should have told you about it. It was in the Financial Times, a serious newspaper, but it was written by somebody who had an understanding of things in Germany. And he said, that what China needs to do is, obviously China can make cars cheaply and better than anyone else can. So what China, in its own interests, must do is it must buy more cars from others. So
Right.
so China must buy cars more expensively and less good cars than the cars that it makes itself.
Yeah.
I mean, it was surreal. Actually, it was a bizarre article,
Mhm.
and it was saying that if China doesn't do that, this is always the ugly side of it, the threat. If China doesn't do that, then that means that the only answer is protectionism, because we got to protect our inefficient and expensive car industry from this more efficient and cheaper car industry and more efficient car industry, which is China's. And unfortunately, this narrative has gained traction with all sorts of people. So, the people have been told in Germany, Mercedes and Volkswagen and all of these
Mhm.
places are now in trouble. It's China's fault.
Mhm.
I'm worried that that is what Merz is going to come to China and say. Whereas what he really ought to be saying is, look, all of our car industries are in a terrible mess. We've got to work hard and think of how we can improve them. How can we improve them? Let's
Mhm.
get into partnerships with China. But of course, it's China's fault because they make cars better and more cheaply than anyone else.
So, don't you think there is a disconnection a little bit between the German business
Yes,
community and the government, right?
yes,
The
there
German
is.
government.
There
Yeah.
is. And I have to say this. I was surprised 4 years ago when the wars, crisis with Russia began, that the German business community was so quiet at that
Mm.
time.
Mhm.
And when they were so quiet when relations with China were jeopardized. But they're finally now starting to speak out more.
Trump Trump recently launched a project called the Genesis Mission. It's very ambitious. They on the White House website they call this a project similar to the Manhattan Project. It seems like the now based on the what I read, they they want to use AI more broadly and not just the building models. So they identified the 6 areas. Seems like they're going to focusing on advanced manufacturing, biotechnology, critical minerals, nuclear fusion and fission, energy, quantum information science, and the semiconductors and the microelectronics. So those are, I guess, the key areas that they identified that they need to in my view, even though they didn't mention China, but it's very clear
Yeah.
these are the areas they need to compete with China, I guess. What I feel interesting is that nobody even talking about essentially what this project is doing is giving all the U.S. government owned data to tech companies for them to train the AI model.
Yes.
I find it remarkable that nobody even bring this up, saying, is
Yeah.
that right? You can do that,
I
right?
didn't. I didn't. I didn't think of that. But you're obviously absolutely right. You're completely correct about this. Now I'm going to tell you about Genesis and what it is. It's not going to happen. I mean, once upon a time, long ago, in the days of the Manhattan Project and the Apollo Project and the Interstate Highways Building Project, America could do these things. America isn't going to do these things now. But what it will do is it will be another enormous transfer of wealth and power and information and
Mhm.
control into the hands of the tech companies and the tech oligarchs who are going to simply become more and more powerful. And I would not be surprised if they played a major role in putting this together. And after what you've just told me, I'm sure they have.
And also in the big beautiful bill, it's also there's one sentence is basically is saying they ban the states and localities from regulating AI for the next 10 years. So Trump seems very big betting on the AI and those big tech companies. So he gave
Yes.
all the green lights to whatever the help he could give to all the tech companies, right?
You made an excellent point, by the way. America is not just over investing in AI, it's we have this expression in England. I don't know if it exists in the United States, but you're putting all your eggs in one basket.
Mhm.
I mean, if AI doesn't come through and do all of the things that you expect it to, then you are in a very, very bad hole indeed. Because AI is an important technology, no doubt, but there are others too.
Mhm.
And the US is gradually giving up on all of the other technologies because all investment, all funding, all attention is now exclusively on AI. Now, you
Mhm.
can see why that works for the tech companies because the way AI is being done in the US is it's a massive project. I mean, this huge pharaonic style and projects there. And this is big money and big money for the tech oligarchs specifically. Um, I wonder whether that is really how it's going to work. Just saying. I mean, the Chinese one, DeepSeek, that was not how it developed. It developed in a much more organic way. And I have to say, I feel that this is wrong. Let me give you another example, which I know more about. The United States made huge efforts in drones,
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
drone warfare, and it created these enormous, very expensive drones, the Raptor and the
Mhm.
Predator, and all of these things, which were huge. On the Ukrainian battlefronts, drones like that don't
Mhm.
survive 5 minutes. It's small, cheap drones
Mhm.
of the kind, by the way, that China makes.
Mhm.
Those are the drones that actually work on a battlefront. But getting America to change direction on drones is already also proving, by the way, very, very difficult because the industry likes the big,
Mhm.
expensive, gold plated drones. It doesn't want to make small, simple, cheap drones, many of which, by the way, use AI
Mhm.
now on the Ukrainian battlefields. Certainly the ones the Russians used to. Um, the Americans don't do that. And it seems to me that this is exactly the same kind of project.
There is also I feel like there is a shift. It used to be the Democrat are the one who has a close relationship with the Silicon Valley tech
Yeah,
company, but
yeah,
Trump seems getting very close to them.
yes.
I think this Genesis project is very much influenced by, for example, Eric Schmidt. He visited China a lot. He recently came back and he said that in China, people use AI much broadly and use it more like a tool rather than just blindly keep on building those models, those fancy models. So it seems like Trump is addressing this. And even Eric Schmidt actually wrote a book with some other people called the Genesis. So I wonder that must have some impact for this project. But in any event, it just seems like Trump has changed. Being a Republican, he's getting very close to these tech companies, right? They used to not do that. Republicans
Well,
don't.
you're completely correct, but there it is again. You see, what Eric Schmidt wants America to do is reproduce that which China has,
Mhm.
which developed organically there, because
Yeah.
China has, you know, I mean,
Mhm.
Chinese society, Chinese industry, Chinese technology is diffused
Mhm.
across the whole of society. He wants to do it, but he wants a top-down model
Mhm.
to achieve it. And of course, he sells this to Trump.
Mhm.
Trump is very close now to the small ring of oligarchs. Remember the tech
Mhm.
oligarchs? Remember they were all there at the
Yeah.
time of his inauguration. I
Yeah.
mean, it was very, very interesting how they were all there. And this is what's now happening. It's wealth, power becoming incredibly concentrated in a smaller and smaller circle of people in the United States, whereas in China, I get the sense it's the other way around.
Mhm. Yeah, in China, a lot of the technology is
Yeah,
very like it's mass produced and also making it cheap, very cheap, available
exactly,
to
exactly,
yeah, a lot of people.
exactly,
So
exactly.
yeah, it's a very different approach. Yes.
Yes.
Um, Venezuela. So do you think US eventually going to attack Venezuela?
It is very strange because I thought that they would. I
Hmm.
still think that they will, but I'm beginning to wonder why it's taking so long. Because what Trump has done is very typical of Trump, by the way. He's assembled this enormous fleet off the coast of Venezuela, 7 missile destroyers, 1 aircraft carrier, several amphibious warships. Like he's positioned, forward position, F-35 fighter jets to ground bases in various islands. And at the moment, all he's doing with his mighty armada that he's created is make lots of threats, including a threat of imposing a no-fly zone, which he hasn't enforced, by the way.
Yeah.
Aircraft are still flying to Venezuela, and he's also attacking fishing boats and killing fishermen on the high seas for no real purpose. So, what exactly is he thinking? I mean, is he going to attack Venezuela? Isn't he? I mean, up to now, well, I'll say it's beginning to start to look ridiculous.
Yeah.
There's 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 mighty armada located in the Caribbean, facing off against Venezuela, and all it's doing is attacking fishing boats.
And by the way, Pete Hegseth is now being questioned, right? Is
Yeah,
that apparently they're when they were attacking one of the fishing boat, they claim it's drug boat, but people don't think
yeah,
it's a drug boat. But anyway,
no.
they also did a second strike, which is against international law. It is regarded as war criminal behavior. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely was. I mean, a boat destroyed, some survivors clinging on to wreckage. It's perfectly possible to save them, but instead you kill them. I mean,
Yeah.
the inhumanity and the cruelty of it is off the scale.
And supposedly it's caught on camera. Now
Yeah,
they are not releasing it, but supposedly
yeah,
there is footage
yeah,
about that.
yes,
So
yes. I mean, I would make a point, by the way, which is that the United States is not a country that punishes its military when it
no.
commits war
Mm.
crimes. I mean, it's committed many, many, many war crimes indeed um, over the period of its existence, but it's never really prosecuted anybody very seriously for committing war crimes. But this is a particularly egregious case of them doing this. I mean, it's unbelievable what they're doing.
And
Even Americans are shocked.
yeah, and then how do you close airspace for another country? I mean, what gives Trump the right to do that? What is he going to do? Is people going to fly over there? He's going to shoot it down? I mean,
Well,
how
that's
does it
right.
work?
Well, that's exactly the point. I mean, he has no right to do this. Venezuela and the United States are not at war. So, on what possible grounds? He has no legal grounds to do this thing. Um, for the moment, he's not enforcing it. But as you absolutely rightly say, if a civilian airliner flies to Caracas, and they are doing so, by the way, is he seriously suggesting that the United States is going to shoot them down?
Yeah.
I mean, if this was done immediately prior to military action, and the United States gave a warning, the Pentagon gave a warning that from this moment on, aircraft are advised to stay away from Venezuelan airspace because a military operation is about to be conducted. Well, that's a different matter. But a no-fly zone announced in this way is again it is both appalling and at the same time, at some level, absurd.
Yeah, yeah, I also feel it's absurd. We will see. Okay. And also, the whole thing, his excuse, nobody believed him, but he said this is fighting the drug lords and drugs problem. So he's trying to solve the drug problem, even though nobody believes him. At the same time, if it's about drugs, why did he just pardon a Honduras drug dealer?
And campaign publicly for this drug dealers party,
Yeah,
the candidate of that party, to win the ongoing Honduran election, in which, as president of the United States, he has no business getting involved in any way. And just a few weeks ago, he was providing billions, tens of billions of dollars to help another Latin American leader, President Milei, stabilize his currency in advance of elections, despite the fact that President Milei's government was involved in a scandal involving receipts of donations provided by a Argentine businessman who was also heavily involved in drug smuggling and drugs dealing. So, I mean, everybody can tell that it's nothing to do with that. And can I just say, again, it's about China. Venezuela thing ultimately is about China.
But what he's doing is not benefit the U.S. I just don't see how you pardon a drug dealer. The guy, Juan Orlando Hernandez, he actually was imprisoned for trafficking 400 tons of cocaine. I mean, we're not talking about private use or anything.
Oh, that is a huge amount of cocaine, by the way. I mean, it's enormous. I mean, but anyway, you're quite right. I mean, but it was such a brazen act that it has a kind of in-your-face look. I mean, it's as if Trump is basically telling everybody, look, I'm the president of the United States. I can do what I like. I can say what I like. If you don't like it, just go ahead and lump it, basically.
He's no longer American first. I really don't think these things are American first. It's all about China, whatever you can do to derail China.
Absolutely.
The Ukraine situation. So Russian, like you mentioned, that Vitkov was in Moscow and they were talking, but there is no deal, peace deal. And so what's next? Are they going to continue?
Well, the Russians said that there's no peace deal because there's no peace proposal. They've just been given a whole set of 28 points, which they don't really know what to make of. And apparently, they said yesterday that when Witkoff and Kushner turned up in Moscow, they came along with this paper with the 28 points. And then they came up with 4 other papers as well, some of which completely contradict each other. So there's this mess of papers and documents and ideas. And the Russians have said, look, okay, we've seen all of this. Some of this is good. Some of this is bad. Some of this is absolutely terrible. We can talk about some things. We can absolutely reject others. But obviously, there's no proposal we can accept here. What we need to do is conduct a proper negotiation with proper negotiating teams so that we can sit down and work this thing through. Now, I don't know whether Trump is interested in anything like that. I don't know whether Kushner and Witkoff are the sort of people really to conduct that kind of thing. But that's what the Russians said. I don't think we're any further forward at all, actually.
And in the meantime, I also wonder, what do you think of this scandal around Zelensky, his chief of staff, Andrea Yermak? He resigned, even though I don't think he's named in this scandal. Now, my question is this. Now, Ukraine has been a very corrupted country. That's no news, right? So, and we know Zelensky has some problems. But why does it become such a big deal now? Is it Trump's way or people around Trump to put pressure on him to accept the peace deal?
It may be. That is a widely held view, and it is a plausible one because the investigative agencies that are involved in these investigations, there's 2 of them. One is called NABU and the other is called SAPO. These are Ukrainian names, which I'm discuss what they are, but they're investigative agencies. They were set up by the United States back in 2014, and they were funded by the United States to investigate corruption. Now, in 14 years, they've achieved nothing, except suddenly they've now been activated. Now, paradoxically, they're not funded directly by the United States anymore. They're funded, in fact, by the European Union. But, it's likely that the US still controls them or has some control over them. But the other thing to say about these corruption investigations is, yes, it's quite likely the Americans are involved. It's quite likely that Zelensky's political opponents in Kiev are also involved. Yermak, who, as you rightly said, is not yet directly implicated in any of this, was targeted because he was Zelensky's right-hand man, and the intention was to weaken Zelensky. The reason this is happening now is because on the battlefronts, things are falling apart. Pakrovsk has fallen, Kupiansk has fallen. The Russians are advancing faster and faster. The Ukrainian army is crumbling. Reuters did a survey of 11 Ukrainian soldiers who joined the Ukrainian army earlier this year. All 11 are either dead or wounded or deserted. None of them is in the battle in the army anymore. So, I mean, you get a sense of a crisis developing. And in this crisis, all sorts of things happen. People start to maneuver and try to take control, and panic grows. And the Americans perhaps also trying to get the negotiations kick-started so that they can get some kind of deal with the Russians before everything collapses. And that's probably why these corruption investigations are taking place.
Well, in that case, if I were Russian, I would more inclined not to sign any peace agreement because I'm winning in the battleground. Why do I stop now? Right?
It's very interesting you say that because Putin actually addressed that very question. And there was a meeting some days ago in Moscow in which he said, look, we've received this is before the meeting that took place with the Americans yesterday. But he said, look, we've been shown these 28 points. We know that there are others, but at that time they didn't know what they were. And he said, look, some of these things are clearly unacceptable. Some of them might be things we can talk about with the Americans. We would prefer to just go on fighting and win the war because we're winning the war. And why shouldn't we? But we are prepared to negotiate, and we're doing this for two reasons. Firstly, because we're civilized people. And if we can achieve our objectives by peaceful means, of course we will do so. And of course, by doing so, we will save the lives of our soldiers. But secondly, I've had conversations with our friends and allies around the world, and I spoke to all of the leaders of all our countries, all the friendly countries, and they've all made it clear to me that they want negotiations to take place. Now, I'm not reproducing Putin's words. I'm inserting into them some of my interpretation of these words, but I have followed Putin very closely, and I have no doubt that this interpretation is correct. One of those friendly countries, by the way, is China, obviously. So Putin said, we're civilized people, but we also have our friends around the world. They want us to negotiate. And that's exactly right. I think China has always wanted to try and see a negotiated resolution of this conflict. And the Russians take that into account. So they're not going to compromise. They're not going to throw away their victory. But at the same time, they're not going to shut the door on negotiations for the two reasons I've said.
By the way, what you talked about the Ukrainian organization who are supposedly independently investigate corruption, these again, I think both in Japan and in Korea they have those organizations too, but they're always controlled by the U.S. So it's almost like it is a tool for the U.S. to control the local officials, right? Make sure they're in line.
I didn't know that they existed in South Korea and the US. Well, that tells you who controls these countries.
Yeah. Because if you're not doing things according to what the US wants, they can always launch some kind of investigation, right?
Yes,
Whether it's
yes.
true or not, they can.
And Japan, by the way, is riddled with corruption.
Hmm.
Just to
Hmm.
say,
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Speaking of corruption, there is a big scandal in Philippines,
yeah,
flood fund scandal.
yeah.
The whole fund is like $9.8 billion dollars, so it's a huge amount of money. But the flood this year is worse than
Yes.
ever. That doesn't seem like
Wow.
the government has done anything. So it turns
Mm,
out the money is missing, and they are investigating a guy called Zaldi Call, who is a contractor. He is now in hiding because there is somebody issued a arrest warrant for him. But he, through his some channel, he said Marcos Jr., his executive, his son, his cousin, they were all somehow involved. So there's a huge scandal going on. My question is this: Marcos family, his parents were deeply corrupted. The
yeah.
Philippine people should know that. Why did they vote for him in the first place?
I have no idea. I mean, I find that extraordinary, actually. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, Marcos's corruption, Marcos Senior's
Mhm.
corruption
Yeah,
was notorious around the world.
yeah,
So, why people in the Philippines should have thought that the sun would be any different?
yeah.
I cannot for the life of me understand. I mean, it was obvious. I mean, we heard about Imelda Marcos,
Uh-huh.
Marcos's wife, and her vast collection of shoes. That's the kind of family that the younger Marcos has come from.
Yeah.
I can only presume that elections in the Philippines are conducted in a very strange way and that they're, at least in part, run by the United States.
Yeah. And these countries, they all have some families. It seems like a very
Mm.
established families, and the
Yes,
elections almost always happen between families, right? So
yes.
it doesn't matter what the families done in the past. You have the big name, of course, you have the resource, and then voters just you pick which family.
Yeah, which
Okay.
is exactly the same in Greece, by the way.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I don't live in Greece is because I belong to one of those families
Mhm.
and I wanted to opt out of that system, just to
Okay.
say.
Well, it's actually pretty common. I think Pakistan is a little bit like that too.
Yeah,
There's
it
some,
is. Absolutely,
yeah,
it is.
yeah.
Absolutely is. And of course, corruption is absolutely essential part of that system
Uh-huh.
because what these families do is that they're basically clans.
Uh-huh.
And once they gain power, they distribute favors to the people who supported them in order to
Yeah.
gain power.
Yeah. Yeah. And India also, I think, have some families also.
Very
Yeah.
much so. Very
Yeah.
much so.
Okay. Something light. You like movies, right? And you are a dog owner, right? There's a
Absolutely.
movie there's a movie called Zootopia, Zootopia 2. So it's a big hit now in China over the weekend. It grossed
Mm.
in $272 million, which is about half of the movie's overall, world gross. What's interesting is in some of the Chinese movie theaters, they allow dog owners and pet owners like a dog and cats to bring their pets to come with them to watch the movie together.
Wow, I didn't know. Gosh,
Apparently a
I,
big hit.
my big head. I don't know this for a fact, but I've always assumed that China is a dog-friendly country, society. Actually,
Yeah,
I mean, for one thing, there's so many Chinese dog breeds. Just to say.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And wow.
Yeah, so I find that interesting. And they also, for a
Yeah,
few years, the Hollywood was not so certain about the Chinese market because it's
yeah.
controlled, it's this and that. But here you have, as long as you have good movies, people still go to movie theaters, and you can still make a lot of money from the Chinese
Oh,
market,
no,
apparently. So,
absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, I understand it's marvelous. It's huge. And I
hmm.
understand the cinemas are actually very, very good in China. I mean, the buildings and the
Hmm.
setup there, and they're clean and they're comfortable and they're it's an attractive experience to go to a movie theater in China. That's what I've heard anyway. Mm.
Yes, and like it seems like in the West, the movie theater is kind of a decline, but
It is.
but but in China, movie theater is still very popular. As
Yes,
long
I
as you
know.
have good movies, people will go.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. Yes, it is in decline. It's still in decline in Britain, which is a shame, by the way, because
Hmm.
many of the movie theatres in Britain were built in the 1920s and 30s. And the buildings themselves are extremely impressive. They're like
Hmm.
palaces
Hmm.
that, as I said, they've been very neglected and run down, and many of them have closed. But I've heard about this, that in China, they take the film industry in China, I gather, is very, very big and very strong and very successful. By the way, I used to watch Chinese films,
Uh-huh.
and some of them that I saw I liked enormously, but I'm very, very out of touch with films that are being made in China now.
Well, because the
Just to
West,
say,
the British, I
it's
guess they
close.
don't take in many
Well,
Chinese
exactly.
movies.
I think that's exact. I
Yeah.
think that's exactly right. I think that is exactly what happens. I mean, once upon a time, when China was poor, we were not afraid to take Chinese films. And people like myself, Yellow Earth and
Hmm.
Raise the Red Lantern and films of
Hmm.
that kind, we were able to see them. But now that China is rich and becoming richer and is suddenly become a threat,
Yeah.
absolutely, we mustn't see films about China anymore. And we mustn't distribute them in our cinemas. And you can't get DVDs or things like that of them. So that's what's happened. I mean, American domination is strange. It's many people have pointed this out that as America is in relative decline, its grip on Europe is strengthening.
Yeah.
It's this very strange thing. So we the only foreign films that we get in Britain today, apart from a few French ones, are American overwhelmingly
Mhm.
now.
Which is unfortunate because I do think the
Yeah.
British are good at making movies and telling
We were
stories.
very good. We were very
Yeah.
good at making movies, and we still are. We've got a small industry, but we did used to make very good films altogether.
Which could be one area Britain can work with China. Why not?
Absolutely, of course, absolutely. There was, i- Sophia, a really intelligent, really consistent government in Britain could do an awful lot that would be very good and which would have a very quick effect. It could
Hmm.
change the whole situation and the atmosphere in Britain very fast. And you're absolutely correct. We could develop a film industry with China. We have
Hmm.
enormous amount of literature that which we could
Yeah.
develop with China.
Hmm.
I think China would be very interested, for example, in many of our Shakespeare's historical plays, for example,
Yeah.
which
Yes.
would be very interesting to Chinese people to see and to see how the British perform them and British adaptations of them. And there could be joint projects maybe to try and do Shakespeare
Yeah.
adaptations, but
Hmm.
set in periods of Chinese history, for
Uh-huh.
example, which
Yeah.
might make them interesting to people in China. There's all sorts of things we could do, but we're
Hmm.
not doing any of them because we have to be a great power and we have to have this black and white view of the world.
Hmm.
And we don't really want to take China seriously, and we're afraid of it in so many ways. The one thing I would say, and this is important for people in China to be aware of at a personal level, because we have a big Chinese community here and
Hmm.
it's present in all the various cities. There are no tensions between British people and Chinese people at all. I
Hmm.
mean, that simply doesn't exist in Britain at all. So there is that, and it might be something to hold on to and to build on in future time. But
And
dog owners going into cinemas with their dogs, that is really remarkable. Um, as a dog owner, I can only wish. Just to say.
just so you know, in China, the consensus is British movies in general are higher quality than Hollywood movies. That's
Yeah,
the
I think that.
consensus. That
Yeah,
maybe Hollywood have a lot of a blockbuster, but those just it's a crowd pleaser, but that's not a high level like in terms of literature, in terms of the movie quality. It's not that high quality. It just crowd pleasers, Hollywood.
Well, I will tell that to Catherine, who knows people in the film industry here, and I will pass that on, and maybe they can do some advocacy about it because that is a very. I agree, by the way, I absolutely do agree. Precisely because the British don't have the resources that the Americans have, they actually have to think about films, and as a result, the films are better. But I will pass that on to Catherine, and that might be something that, after all. We cooperate with the Americans on films all the time. Why shouldn't we cooperate with the Chinese?
Yes, I would love to see that. Yeah,
absolutely. Much bigger market.
Absolutely, yes.
So much we could do. By the way, I mean, we're still strong in mathematics. There's still people who work in AI. We're trying to create a science cluster around Oxford and Cambridge universities. These things cry out for partnership with China.
Yeah. Just the British government need to change their attitude, their arrogance towards China.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Let's talk next week. Thank you so much.
And I look forward to our next program very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.